Welcome to the Honest Health Podcast with your host, Jeffrey Burke. Honest Health brings you the brightest minds in the natural products industry, as well as athletes and entertainers. Jeff will keep you entertained and informed while educating on how to be successful on your healthy journeys. Now, here's your host, Jeffrey Burke.
Hello and welcome back to the Honest Health Podcast. My name is Jeffrey Burke. I'm so glad you're here. We're getting a lot of attention out there. I think it's great. People are all looking for great information and hearing from great minds. And, no matter how much we learn, there's always more to learn. And every time you think you've learned it all, you hit a Y in the road and you find out that you don't. And I am so guilty of that. So, of course, I tell everybody all the time, continue learning, continue asking questions, and continue your quest for knowledge. On this show, I'm bringing you the best minds in the industry. And I'm also going to start bringing you professional athletes and entertainers because I want their take as well. Because it's, like I said, all about information. I want it to be a situation where you never know what's coming next on my show, and that'll be fun. So make sure that you tune in, tell your friends, tell your family, tell everybody you know. Go to my webpage, drjeffreyburke.com. Make sure you save the webpage on your phone so you don't have to keep looking for it. You can click on it anytime, touch on the Honest Health logo, and it will take you to Spotify. So you can listen. You can also click on the YouTube logo, and it'll take you to the YouTube page where you can watch all the interviews when all of it's convenient for you. That's the great thing about podcasts. Different than radio for 40 some years where you had to be there at that time. But today you don't have to. You can make it fit your schedule. So today you're going to really enjoy my guest. We've done many, many radio shows together. Carina Toledo is a board-certified clinical nutritionist and a certified nutrition specialist and holds certificates in Master Herbalism and nutritional genomics. She earned her master's in clinical nutrition from Sonoran University and a master's of healthcare innovation from Arizona State University. Carina's worked in the dietary supplement industry for 25 years in a variety of roles, beginning in the sales sector, then transitioning into brand and ingredient education, and now works in a practitioner space as a clinical educator and a clinician herself. Carina is passionate about functional and root cause medicine, emphasizing personalized approaches to supplementation and diet, and she specializes in women's and health and aging, digestive and metabolic health, and sports nutrition. Yep, she does it all. You're going to enjoy this today. Help me welcome my guest. Hey, Carina.
Hi there, Jeff. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, it's my pleasure. It's been a while, and you and I have a great history. We've done, I can't tell you how many radio shows together over the years, many, many, many. And what's new in your world? Let's catch up.
Yeah, essentially I am busting through summer with kids home and working steadily, and I still see clients on occasion, but also doing a lot of clinical education here with different practitioners. And it's been a really incredible journey, as working in sales and then transitioning to education and now on the clinician side. I've seen a lot of changes in our industry and I'm excited to be a part of it now as things are kind of moving forward and people are becoming more empowered with their health and asking more questions. I feel like more than ever, I talk to, MDs and doctors that traditionally weren't integrative that are now really embracing supplements and embracing a lot of these trends and recognizing the importance. For example, I spoke with a psychiatrist and they're voicing the importance of the gut-brain axis. And so we need to support the gut in order to support, mood health. And it's like, aha, of course. So it's just been incredible to be on this side of it and see kind of that journey as well for practitioners and for patients, kind of that aha moment.
And I agree. I agree 100%. And we are seeing changes and we are seeing more of a melding of our industries together. And I think for many reasons. One, the science is there in many applications that we didn't have when I first started 4 decades ago and you 2.5 decades ago. Of course, things have changed. And also the wants and the needs of patients and people out there that are looking for other ways, other paths to follow. And maybe they just don't want to go a traditional way. Maybe they're looking, or maybe they've tried it and it didn't work. And now they're trying to find something that might give them an alternative of success. So I think coming from all the different angles, I think everybody wants to feel better. Everyone wants to live a healthier life. And, life is stressful now. Mental health is crazy. The world is topsy-turvy. And, I think a lot of us just want to be able to get through the day without spending every ounce of our day in a doctor's office.
Yeah, amen to that.
Hmm.
And, I think just talking about shifts and changes and people, wanting to be more empowered about their health. And I think we saw really big changes following COVID where
Hmm.
people couldn't see a doctor, obviously, and they needed to really start thinking about how to optimize their wellness. And so there was kind of this upsurge of, biohacking where people are like, what can I learn about my body? How can I really be empowered? And I feel like versus the early times of the industry when you saw a lot of older people that were educated about supplements or seeking education in the health food store.
Hmm.
Now you've got a whole generation of people that are really young and healthy that are looking to optimize their health. And, what does that mean? Being on this journey where we're not, even in the supplements industry, I feel like historically we are still looking at symptoms, bringing in supplements to address symptoms or disease that we are experiencing. Whereas now there's more of this really chasing that optimal health. How can we really optimize our daily wellness and, prevent the development of chronic diseases down the road? And I love seeing, all these very young people, the certainly the Gen Yers and just, and Gen Zers really evolving into this movement and becoming really passionate about their own health and demanding more personalized care.
Something that I have always traditionally really, really liked is the quest that people have for knowledge. And it just seems like today we have so much information at our fingertips and we got to sift through it. We got to research the research because many times there's a lot of words out there that are being thrown around that really don't apply to anything that's ever been tested or proven. So following the science is very important. But I think the thing that I think I find the most interesting is what we talked about decades ago did affect a very older geriatric sector of our society. Most of the people, to your point, were older and they were looking to feel better and maybe regain some of their health. But the idea of preventive and taking care and doing something and laying the golden road along the way so you could reap the benefits down the road, no, that wasn't really happening. And all of those old age situational health conditions and diseases that at that time centered in on mostly the older folks that were in our population, it's like those walls came down. And today, it's not an age-based situation. It's probably more of a lifestyle choice situation. I mean, we have younger people today with hormonal problems and cardiovascular
Yeah.
disease and diabetes and, degenerative hip and joint problems, muscle problems, immune suppressed problems. And this is something that for the longest time seemed to center or focus directly on the older geriatric clientele. And I'll tell you what, I'm talking to younger people today, and I don't think it's a luxury to think about health and nutrition and diet and lifestyle choice anymore. I think it's a necessity, and they're having to look at it. So we're actually talking to a very broad spectrum of listeners today because it's not just the geriatric community anymore. What do you think?
Yeah, I think you bring up so many incredible points. First off, these diseases of old age are by no means just affecting people of old age. We're
Hmm.
seeing very young people, the rise in autoimmune conditions, and a lot of it certainly is the environmental exposure, this body burden. Our livers are just overloaded with toxins. And if we weren't raised on an optimal diet, if we don't have a healthy microbiome, all of that is really coming to light much earlier ages. And there is so much information that is really rapidly evolving in the nutrition space, especially because historically we couldn't really do studies on, the benefits of broccoli, for example, because the gold standard of research is generally these double-blind placebo-controlled trials, and people know if they're eating broccoli, and also a lot of these more holistic tools, botanicals and quality foods that we have in our diet, there's not a ton of money to put behind those in terms of research incentives. And so then, you don't have a lot of money going into really identifying what are these benefits of a whole food, incredible diet. And it's one of the interesting things, going back to school and getting my master's. I definitely feel like what school taught me the most was how much I don't know.
to,
And
to, to my point, or yeah,
yeah,
exactly. Yeah, boy, I know that feeling. But no, I
and
love
it's,
it. And I love it that
go
you
ahead.
went back.
Yeah,
When I went back and I went back to school again, I thought to myself, this is going to be a breeze. Well, no breeze was to be
yeah,
had. Let me tell you, it took a lot. But I'll tell you what, I learned a lot. I relearned a lot. I remembered some of the the stuff I forgot along the way, and it was a really good refresher course to me to give me the information. Did you find that as well?
Absolutely. And I think, it's evolved so much. I mean,
Hmm.
if I had tried to get my master's in nutrition even a decade ago, we wouldn't have a lot of the research that we have now. And, part of my most passionate experience in that was really learning about nutritional genomics and understanding the research that's evolving in terms of, we know so much more now about how our genetics affect our metabolism of different nutrients, how nutrients affect our genetics. You know, just as a quick example, MTHFR is this, gene variant that has really more and more people understand and are having their genes tested to see if they have this genetic variant, then they know that maybe they need more folate or they need a different form of folate. We know that people with certain genetic variants don't process saturated fats as well, or some need more vitamin C or more omega-3 fats. So there's this huge evolution of research that's really evolved in the past, decade or less. And every day there's new publications. So was really exciting to be in school, feeling more like we're at the cutting edge of really what's happening in terms of the evolution of nutritional science.
The other thing that's interesting is if you study world culture, you'll see that a lot of these things that we are considering to be brand new today have been used for hundreds, if not thousands of years in other places in the world. And it's funny because you'll hear all this media, craziness going around something, and I'm like, we've been talking about that for like 20 years now. And,
Yeah.
but it hasn't really made the main stage for whatever reason. Things like ashwagandha and maitake mushrooms and shiitake and all of these herbs used around the world. I mean, going back hundreds, if not thousands of years. And, and I'm glad they're kind of rediscovering it on our side, but the people in the cultures that have been using this, they get it. They get it. They understand it. I mean, it's a huge part of their culture, like turmeric and curcumin and boswellia and things like that. And you go there. I've had friends that have studied a year in India, and he talks to all these people culturally, and they're just like, we've been doing that since we were kids, and they're like 90
Yeah.
years old, and and they're people that live in parts of the European part of the world where there's fish, and they've been eating 2 or 3 different kinds of fish every day, and they're loaded with omega-3s. For them, it's just diet. So we have a lot to learn, and I'm glad that maybe we're at the point right now when people are ready to learn.
Yeah, absolutely. And I listened to your podcast with Chris Kilman. He definitely highlighted, that the demand for a lot of these botanicals is, really companies bringing them to market and introducing them. There's so many botanicals that really didn't have a place or identification in Western culture until, many companies had a great source of them and started bringing them and introducing them. I mean, things like black seed oil, which, I knew nothing about 20 years ago. And
Mm-hmm.
then 10 years ago, it was like it's everywhere. And, as you said, many cultures throughout the world, this is part of their, food as medicine.
Yes.
All throughout Ayurveda, they are, consuming herbs and spices as part of their daily consumption. I mean, it's one of the oldest traditional systems of medicine in the world, but it's also integrated, of course, with the body healing of yoga and integrating spices to help bring the body into harmony. And you look at, of course, turmeric and ginger eaten daily. I think I love to see the research that's grown on the Mediterranean diet, for example, but I can't help but laugh. It's like you look at, all this evidence now that the Mediterranean diet is the it diet for, every cardiometabolic disease out there, right? Balancing inflammation. It's like,
Like, duh.
well, duh, it's whole foods. It's, nuts and seeds and fish and fruits and vegetables. And, it's, pretty foundational and good fats, and I think there's been such this full circle. We had to go around, the
Mm-hmm.
bush and kind of get it backwards. And now just this recognition that if we could all just eat really quality herbs and spices and foods every day, get quality sleep, adhere to these kind of pillars of health, then definitely we could be different people.
When I first started way back in, oh, Lord, like 1980, 81. Oh my, that's a long time ago. Anything with a 19 at the front means you're old. So I remember being in the health food stores, and vitamin D was on the bottom shelf, and we were actually encouraged not to talk about it. It was right next to flaxseed oil and omega 3s,
Mm-hmm.
because nobody talked about that stuff. Today they're superstars, but the mentality was that vitamin D was toxic and that they were taking a multiple. They couldn't take any supplemental. And it's so interesting now. I was at a conference where the whole thing was on vitamin D, and all the doctors were talking about you need to get your D level checked, and everybody is low. And I'm thinking to myself, wow, because where we were on that and where we are today, because, that's another point. You can actually get your levels checked and find out, when I had my last blood work done, I thought I was where I should be. I was taking enough. I wasn't. And I found out that I was really low. Now, it could be genetic. My mother takes a very huge dosage, but she's 90 and she takes 100,000 a week in one dose just to be able to get her levels too close to normal. So
Yeah.
I increased my level to 5,000 a day, and now my levels are really good. I was taking 1,000. I said, well, that's got to be enough, but it wasn't. So, we're all different. We don't all fit in the same box. And, if you're getting your blood work done, ask your physician, can I get my testosterone checked? Can I get my prostate antigen done? Can I get my vitamin D, maybe my omega-3 checked? Because that way you'll know, because it's kind of like our car. It stops working. There's stuff going on under the hood. We don't know what it is. It'd be nice if we had a better idea, and then we can make adjustments and plot twist, if you will.
Yeah, absolutely. And what a great example of how Western medicine has finally caught up to a little bit more of the nutritional understanding around vitamin D, especially. The RDA is now a little bit higher. It's still a little bit, low, I think, in terms of what most people need. As you point out, there is genetic variance, there's aging, the fact that most of us are inside all the time, vitamin D deficiency and insufficiency is pretty rampant. And now that insurance covers vitamin D testing, I would encourage, all of your listeners, have your preventive labs done, figure out where you are on all of that blood work. Any information you can get is better for making educated decisions, and even better when you're kind of young and in this optimal range, right? But vitamin D, I had the same experience as you did. I had asked my practitioner some time ago, my primary care, to test me, and they're like, oh no, you spend time in the sun, you're an athlete, you've got fair skin, there's no way you're low, right? And then I had my DNA tested and found out that I had a genetic variant that could mean that I need more vitamin D. And lo and behold, when I had mine tested, it was like I was in the 20 range.
Yeah.
And for years I had been taking, just like you, 1,000, 2,000 IU a day, and realized that it just wasn't cutting it. And
Yep.
so you don't know until you know. And,
Mhm.
Vitamin D, yes, it's a fat soluble nutrient. Yes, you don't want to get too much. You want to hone in on that dose. And that's why the data really matters. If you can find out what your levels are, then you can, really make educated decisions about your supplementation. And, this personalization piece is so important because we're not all created alike. There is really important differences in terms of what nutrients we need, what diet might be best for us, but you don't necessarily know unless you have all the information.
How do you feel about, and I'm just going to take this a different direction, about vegan and vegetarian? I mean, I know I can't. I've tried, and I think it's wonderful. I tried it when I travel, and I've been on the road so much for so long. I will go to vegetarian and vegan restaurants just to kind of get a break from things while I'm traveling, and I enjoy it. But I do know that I'm a carnivore, and I've got an O blood type, and I mean, I know what makes me feel good.
Yeah.
What do you think about, vegan, vegetarian diets? Just curious.
Yeah, it's interesting. I feel like it's come a little full circle now, and there's more and more people that are focusing on plant-based diets, but realizing that they need some sort of meat protein. I mean, the quality of protein from animals is very high, and it's very bioavailable and easy to digest. And I personally am not a vegan or a vegetarian. I don't want to say I don't advocate for that, because I think everybody's body is different, and there's
Agreed.
different reasons why people make those choices. But I don't know who to equate it to, but I always love the line that it's not the cow, it's the how.
Yeah.
And this idea that meat is bad for us is been far debunked, and yes, if we eat a ton of meat and it is being fed, for example, cows that are grain fed tend to have really high amounts of omega-6s, and they can create this pro-inflammatory response in the body that can, eventually when we are in this chronic state of inflammation, that is what puts us at risk for cardiovascular disease, and even cancers and all these other chronic diseases tend to have this root in inflammation. But historically, when you look at grass-fed, free-range cows, for example, that are eating grass, they actually have a significant amount of omega-3s in their, when you consume that meat, you're getting omega-3s in your diet as well. So I think for the most part, it's how, the animals are raised that can play a role, certainly in their health benefits. Every body is really individual and unique, but, I do think in terms of bioavailability, and like you said, knowing what works for myself. And at the very least, I've been known to beg vegans to eat fish oil. We know that when it comes to adequate amounts of omega-3s, plant sources are just not very efficient. You can get chia seeds, you can get, walnuts, flax seeds. These are sources of omega-3s, and some people do fine with them. But again, the efficiency of converting those into DHA is very low. And so you would need to eat a lot to really get the amounts of omega-3s that you need. And especially if you're getting a lot of omega-6 in the diet from, animal foods or from processed oils, you need more omega-3s to really balance that out. So, I am a big fan of eating fish, pescatarian. So even if someone isn't comfortable, eating, chicken, poultry, beef, definitely trying to incorporate fish, I think, is so important.
I was talking with my friend Stuart Tomk. He was one of my first podcasts that I did, and I've done so many shows with Stuart over the years. And he told me about when he was abroad. I think he was in Norway, and he was there for a while. And I teased him, just teasing. I said, "So are you having a lot of fish?" And he goes, "Jeff," he goes, "it's not just having fish once or twice a week. It's what fish are we having at that meal?" And I said, "Really?" He goes, "I have never eaten so much fish in my entire life." And I said, "How did you feel?" He goes, "I felt great." So he started doing this sardine thing where he was eating a can of sardines every day. And I love fish. He says, "You got to try it." So I ate them the first day, and and the second day I opened the can, I couldn't. I just couldn't. They're not for me, but I love fish. I love salmon and mackerel and halibut and all that stuff, but I couldn't do the sardines. And he says, over there, it's like a cultural thing. Everybody enjoys, and maybe when you're raised on it, it's a little bit better. It's hard for me, but I'll tell you what, I wish I could, because the omega-3s in a can of sardines and oil would be phenomenal for good health and skin, that I'm not 30 anymore, so you need to kind of work from the inside out. That lumen oil is really important. And to your point, I do plant-based omega-3s too. I do chia seeds and flax seeds and walnuts and things like that, but I think I rely more on my fish oil.
Yeah. And I'm like you. I love salmon, and I love, not fishy fish. The anchovies and sardines are a little bit harder for me. I've got a funny story for you. I took my daughter out, who loves anchovies. I took her out to a pizza place. This is actually a couple years ago, when she was younger. And, so she's really little. We go and we just order a slice at the bar, and they've got a really good gluten-free pizza there. And so I order, a slice of cheese and then a slice with anchovies, and they bring out the cheese cut into, little mini slices and hand that to her, and they hand me the anchovies. I was like, no, that was for her. They just automatically assume this little kid doesn't have a palate to like anchovies. Clearly, the adult here in the situation. So it was a great example for me of like, she's been eating that diet all along. We've always kind of fed her anchovies and sardines. I'm not a huge fan personally. And so I try to, turn away so she doesn't see me make a face when she eats them. But so much of it kind of comes back to that, what diet were they raised on? What are they eating when they're young? I had a ton of fish oil and fish when I was pregnant, and anchovies and sardines are such a great choice because they're smaller fish, so they tend to accumulate, fewer toxins in the body, such a high source of really quality fatty fish. Mm-hmm. So I love that. I wish that I was more on board with that, but I do consume my quality fish oil, and I definitely eat salmon as often as I can, and try to integrate it regularly.
Someone asked me the other day, they said, as far as your childhood, are there things that you did in your childhood that you've carried to today, and now today that's the thing to do? And my grandmother lived next door to us, and she had this big pot on her stove. And I swear to God, I think she had that same pot on her stove for like 30 years, and it was always full of chicken bone broth.
Yeah.
I think all she did was continue adding chicken and chicken bones and celery and onions. And when you went to her house, it was always hot, always ready to go. And she would greet you with a cup of chicken broth. And I just thought it was the coolest thing. And but that was my Nana. She loved chicken broth. And of course, she baked and gardened and did all that stuff as well. But, here we are today in a situation where like bone broth is it's a cool thing to do because
It's
they've
sold in
learned.
stores.
Yeah, exactly. So we've learned a lot about, some of the things that were around back then. And that was one that I carried with me. Of course, the fruits and the vegetables and the mushrooms and the asparagus that we used to pick and all that stuff. I mean, that stuff was just stuff you did because culturally everybody in the neighborhood did it.
Yeah.
So I apply that to around the world of people, doing sardines and doing fish or doing turmeric or doing Ayurveda, it's amazing how we were raised, but a lot of us have had to learn things because we didn't get that as a kid.
Yeah. I love seeing the evolution of bone broth and how it is sold in these pre-packs in stores.
I
And
know.
it's like, wait, I've been doing this for a long time. And similarly, like you, I kind of learned those traditions. And,
Mhm.
I remember watching my grandma take, and she was wartime era. So she took every possible scrap, so when you cut up the onions and you take all those peels that you might throw in the garbage, she would put them in a plastic bag and put them in the freezer. So
Uh-huh.
every part of your vegetable that you're not going to use to cut with, your onion scraps, the outside of your garlic peels, your tops of your carrots, all that would go into a bag in the freezer and just get stuffed away until the next time she had a bone broth and to make. And I personally have, integrated that into my daily routine. I mean, we get, roaster chicken at least once a week and, use every part of it. Obviously, makes like 3 meals a day, and then the bone broth goes into making your rice or your beans. And so, yeah,
There
it's
you go.
just constantly kind of recycling, the food that we have and really making the most out of, every opportunity to kind of get these beneficial nutrients in. I mean, bone broth is such a rich source of collagen, and certainly, for skin and healthy aging, that's something that I love as part of my routine for sure. And I am excited. I have a greenhouse for the first time this year. So
Oh,
now I
how
have a ton
wonderful.
of extra scraps that I need to do something with. So they all, even my carrot tops, all that stuff goes right in a bag in the freezer so I can use it to make my next stock.
One of my friends was at his mom's house and he was telling me what she was doing because she learned it from, I guess, from her family. So she saves those, to your point, onion skins and stuff, and she keeps them in the freezer. And when she gets like 3 or 4 bags, she puts them all on a cookie sheet and she puts them in the oven for like 2 hours until they're like falling apart. And then she puts them in the food processor. She grinds them up and makes her
Oh,
own onion powder. And I was just
yeah.
like, why don't we not think of these things? I'm thinking to myself,
Yeah.
because I throw them away, but now I'm going to start putting them in a bag and putting them in my freezer.
Yeah, exactly. Or even just the simple trick of, you're trying to create nutrient-rich soil in a greenhouse, for
Yeah.
example. Take all those eggshells,
Hmm.
grind them up in a blender or food processor, and feed them back into the soil. It's amazing all of these strategies that I feel like have kind of been lost to time. As we kind of got out of this need to kind of take care of everything, we lost a lot of these practices, or at least, some of us did. I certainly, I grew up like that with my grandmother, but my mother didn't teach me a lot of that stuff. It was interesting, but I love that idea. Actually, my mother-in-law always roasts her onion peels, and I was like, oh, I need to try that. So now I'll have to integrate that onion powder recipe.
Even if you have a garden, coffee grounds, putting coffee grounds into the soil, and things like that. And obviously we have plenty of horses, so they provide us with stuff for the soil too, so in the manure stage, obviously.
Yeah,
But there's so many things that are in front of us. And I think we've just gotten away from it because the world moves so fast. We're juggling so many plates in the air. And, convenience has ruled the choices that we make. Most of our lifestyle choices are made out of convenience. And, we say we're not going to do it. We say we're not going to eat the fast food. We say we're not going to do the quick fix. But, after a 10 or 12-hour day and you've got deadlines and you got to do it the same thing next, you're going to do something quick,
yeah,
and because out of necessity. And as organized as you are. I mean, how many times have we seen a meme on social media? It says, spent $200 at the grocery store, filled up my refrigerator and my pantries and ordered a pizza. Because, we're by that point, we don't want to cook, we don't want to
yeah,
take the time to do that. So, sometimes it's just maybe slowing down a little bit and, collecting our thoughts and maybe doing one good thing for ourselves for a while and then add something else in. And it's kind of like reestablishing some of these healthy things that we've maybe forgotten along the way.
Yeah, and it is hard. We all are tight on time. I mean, I am by no means a purist. I have two kids with, you know, ferocious appetites and it's hard to feed them, enough. And so I do try to keep it really simple and basics but you have to think ahead. You have to get into this rhythm and this pattern to do some food planning and food prep. And, one of the things in practice I would always recommend to clients that struggle with time is say, like, tell them, find your favorite recipe. If you have one recipe that you love, try doubling it just once. And then, freezing that other portion. And so it can easily come out and be heated up, in 40 minutes, 30 minutes, depending on the dish for your family that night. Or even better, if you don't have a lot of people that you're cooking for, I often, for myself, freeze in single serving portions. So I have tons of these glass Tupperware, I'll make my favorite meal and then I just freeze single serving portions and take them out and put them in the microwave. I know some people are anti-microwave, but at the end of the day, I would rather have a healthy, nutritious meal in the microwave than have, a piece of pizza out of the fridge because it's fast, right? Or even something that was going to take me, like a bagel and cream cheese is kind of a standard snack for a lot of people. Well, a delicious stir fry, heated up in the microwave is just as fast when you kind of pre-plan that idea. But I always have beans basically soaking on the counter. I've got beans soaking on the counter right now. And then, using that stock or using water and just really thinking ahead. And it's amazing when you do buy bulk and you start planning, the food costs come down a lot. I definitely tend to not eat out very much just because of having kids. Mainly it's kind of a survival mode. I don't want to be in restaurants with my kids. And also it helps me save money and I eat more nutritious. But even, if you love to eat out, I always recommend too, just try cutting that back in half. Or, or if you eat out, try asking for a box right away and putting half of that in that box for later. There's all these different little tips and tricks to, really help maintain, a healthy diet and also, portion control, because a lot of the restaurants have giant portions. So there's different tricks to eat healthy, but it does take work. And by no means am I like that 7 days a week.
Well, let me ask you a question. We get asked this a lot as practitioners and people in the industry. What are your 5 top supplements that you think that everybody could benefit from? I mean, not to stereotype because we're all different. And when we're back to that, we don't fit in the same box again. But 5 nutrients that you would recommend if someone says, what are 5 that I could start with? And can I make a change with those 5?
Yeah, that is a great question. And I do think there's some foundational overlap for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
First and foremost, I think a quality multivitamin and mineral is foundational. More and more we're learning that, the quality of our food supply has declined significantly. The fruits and vegetables that are available now have anywhere from 30 to 50% fewer nutrients than they did 50, 100 years ago. And then when you add in different, genetic SNPs and genetic variants that could limit or could cause some people to need more nutrients in certain categories, like vitamin C is really common, or environmental exposure, I think everybody needs a multivitamin and mineral to really fill those nutrient gaps. So I would say that's, for everyone. I do generally recommend they also look for, amino acid chelated minerals on the formula. Zinc bisglycinate, for example, is much more bioavailable in that form in combination with other nutrients. You can look for ingredients like methylfolate, so the methylated B vitamins, to ensure that if you don't know if you have a genetic variant, those are really going to help ensure that you're getting that source. And then besides the multivitamin, fish oil. We already said this and I can't say it enough. A quality fish oil daily is so important. And if you're not, even if you are eating fish 3 times a week, chances are you still need more, especially if you have some sort of inflammatory challenge, any type of cardiovascular or metabolic challenge, whether you're trying to maintain a healthy weight or healthy cholesterol or just mood and brain health, fish oil is foundational. Also, I think a prebiotic. I used to be a huge fan of probiotics, and I am still to some degree, but I often, we can talk about probiotics and prebiotics being this kind of seed and feed, or feed and seed. So probiotics, are seeding the microbiome, but we need to make sure we're feeding the microbiome. So there are, and you can get that from quality food sources, fiber, leafy greens. There's also a number of really quality prebiotics out there in the market. One of my favorites, actually, Sunfiber, the hydrolyzed guar gum, because it has been researched to feed the bacteria in our gut that produce short chain fatty acids specifically, but there's other great ones out there. But really looking for a prebiotic source that you can take daily, even if that's like a powder greens formula, because those are feeding your good microbiome too, right? There's some great research that the polyphenols in different plants like green tea and elderberry, blueberries, these all are a rich source of prebiotics as well. So, just really thinking about that. So that's 3. Turmeric or some sort of a botanical, antioxidant formula. I'm a huge proponent of turmeric daily, but there's other, incredible foundational herbs. I'm also a big fan of ginger, for example, but there's other ones that kind of fall into that category. Certainly boswellia is one of my favorites too for healthy inflammation response, respiratory health. Black seed oil is another one that I'm a fan of. So something that's addressing your inflammation, and then certainly something for stress, again, kind of in that botanical area. So an antioxidant of some sort. There's other ones you can do, resveratrol, quercetin, those are all powerful antioxidants also, but then something for stress like ashwagandha is one of my all-time favorites.
Mine too.
There's other adaptogens that I really gravitate towards, rhodiola, for example, eleuthero, because I'm more of someone who's looking for that energy and endurance building especially for athletic performance. But ashwagandha is so versatile and multitasking. It really helps support healthy energy for some people, but it also supports healthy sleep. The name itself comes from, smell of a horse, or more specifically the vigor of a horse. So it really gives you this, rich, energetic, support, essentially helping to prime your body to respond more effectively to stress. So I think anyone who says they don't have any stress in their life, they might find that something else is a better, appropriate 5th option for them. But I think even if you don't think that you have stress, it's a matter of, just not necessarily seeing how it's affecting you. And especially when I was younger, on the road traveling as a sales rep and running around, I think that stress can be good. It can really motivate, and, it serves a very important function, but consistently exposed and consistently having these elevated cortisol and stress hormones, it will significantly deplete your body and affect your blood sugar and your metabolic health and all these other things over time. So I think managing healthy stress levels, as early as you can is really important too.
Our lists are identical.
Nice.
Yeah. So we're either both right or both wrong, but I think we're both right. So I think it's wonderful. I want to thank you for being here today. How much fun is this? Will you come back and see me again?
I would be honored to. I would love to join you anytime.
Now,
Always a pleasure.
before you go, you got to leave everybody with a thought for the day. It could be anything on any topic, but something you want somebody to maybe think about, give them an aha moment and a Carina moment of the day.
Yeah. So I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but I do think that the more information, the more data we can have about our health as it is right now, the better. So I would encourage everyone listening, if you have health insurance, use it. Go to your, primary care physician, get some preventive checkups, have your labs done, find out what your triglycerides are,
Yep.
Have a full CBC panel, a CMP panel, really identify, and also have your vitamin D levels tested to really identify where there might be ways to optimize your health. And I think if you're healthy right now and you don't have any issues, this is the best time to do it, because now you can kind of see what your baseline levels are. And so then when things do become out of balance, you have a greater understanding of what's happening. I think. And then if you can, take that data and share it with, a naturopath, a nutritionist, health coaches are oftentimes, very versed in information as well. And there's just a lot of opportunity to really look at that information and help to optimize your health. And above all, just eat real food if you can, and certainly, take those 5 top supplements.
I love it. Thank you so much for being here today. What a pleasure. It's so great to see you. We have so many shows that we've done on the phone, but now we get to actually see each other. So I think that adds another whole dimension.
I agree. I really appreciate being here. So thanks for the invite, and I look forward to seeing you again.
Thank you. So hope everybody enjoyed the show today. How could you not? All this great information coming from my wonderful guest. Remember, have your friends come, have everybody you know. Go to my webpage, drjeffreyburke.com. Click on the Honest Health logo. It'll take you to Spotify, so you can listen to the show wherever you like. You can also click on the YouTube logo, and you can watch the interviews as well. Both of those are great. But tell everybody to go. It's all about paying it forward, and after we've been doing this for such a long time, I think our jobs in this world is to bring forward information and alternatives and choices and awareness, maybe at the same time, let people know that we do have choices that can be made. So I thank you all. Honest Health Podcast. My name is Jeffrey Burke. My wonderful guest today, Carina Toledo. Thank you so much for being here. And everybody, have a great day. Be well, stay healthy, and God bless.
Stay tuned for more information from the Honest Health Podcast with Jeffrey Burke. And make sure to check back often for interviews and conversations from the guests we all want to hear from. I'm John the Announcer. Thanks for listening.